everyone. I'm Nina Gopal. Welcome to Global Express. This is the weekly interaction with experts where we examine and deconstruct developments in our backyard, our immediate neighborhood, and beyond. Do click on the new Indian Express website and tweet and follow Global Express. So, as the world celebrates the start of a new year, there's also enormous disquiet as 2024 dawns. The Hamas-Israel conflict has set off tremors across the world that have been far more divisive than the Ukraine conflict itself. There's widespread anger on the streets in half the countries on our planet, and the triggers range from the political to the economic to just plain differences. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi had two major foreign policy successes this year. He was feted as a special guest at the White House by the Biden administration, followed by a remarkable hosting of the G20 summit in Delhi, which was seen as a very high point in India and the world, even if it was boycotted by the Chinese President Xi Jinping. By every reckoning, the India-US relationship should be seen as something of a success. India is seen as a non-NATO ally, a major defense partner, all to counter the rise of China. We've been roped into Quad, we've been roped into sort of AUKUS, I2U2, but India has not downgraded its ties with Russia. So we have one foot in Moscow and another in the other camp. The message to China couldn't be clearer. Its presence, not just on our land border along the Himalayas, but in our southern tip, where China's naval prowess is a challenge to India's neighborhood first policy in the Maldives, and Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, makes it an ever-present danger. But October 7th and the Hamas attack and the Houthis blocking the Red Sea has altered everyone's foreign policy priorities. Where once our one-point focus was Pakistan, was the Taliban consolidating in Afghanistan, it's now not just worry about Pakistan army playing musical chairs, but a whole host of other issues, including our falling out with Canada and and the US now raising the issue of the Indian national allegedly involved in an assassination plot, which Prime Minister Modi has now countered today. 2024 is also an election year, not just in India, but in the US and Pakistan, where the abrogation of statehood in Jammu and Kashmir will surely be an issue, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the UK. So taking part in the discussion today are two foreign policy samans. Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan, former High Commissioner to Pakistan, prolific author, expert on the South Asia region, and his book, The People Next Door, is an absolute must-read. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you.
And Professor Amitabh Mattoo, he's one of India's sharpest strategic minds, was on Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh's advisory team, I discovered. He's a visiting professor at a number of universities and think tanks and was the youngest Vice Chancellor of Jammu and Kashmir University. Welcome, Professor Mattoo. So let me start with you, Ambassador Raghavan. We have a major test of our foreign policy with the Hamas-Israel conflict. You know, the latest Suez crisis has seen India deploying two stealth destroyers off the coast of Aden, the INS Kochi and the INS Kolkata. So we've had to up our naval presence. But it seems as if India's foreign policy imperatives are shifting away from our once unifocal, emphasis on just Pakistan. What do you see as our major challenges in the coming year? What do you believe we should prioritize? And also, if we can look back and see what our major foreign policy successes were and what could we term as our major failures.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me and for this discussion. And it's always a great delight and a learning experience to be with Dr. Amitabh Mattoo on the same platform. To my mind, as we look ahead into 2024, one note of caution is useful to bear in mind that, if one looks back at the past 3 or 4 years, it is surprising as to how much things have changed or things have appeared as major challenges which were not expected at all. Even if one disregards the pandemic, but if one looks at what happened on the line of actual control in Galwan in 2000, 20, it was in many ways a somewhat unexpected development. Which is not to say it was totally unexpected, but certainly the manner in which those clashes took place was something which was quite unexpected. Similarly, in 2021, the rapid changes in Afghanistan, the disarray amidst which the US withdrawal was again not predictable at all and led in many
That's
ways to a
true.
new situation. In 2022, while the Russia-Ukraine and the Russia-Europe interface has been friction-ridden for some years, that there would be a war in Europe out of the blue was again not to be anticipated. And similarly in Gaza, that there would be such a uh, major breach in Israel's security, so
Yeah.
much so that the Hamas would burn the whole house down, was again not to be anticipated. I think, to my mind, it's good to keep all this uh, in view as we look ahead to 2024. Things are not going to necessarily pan out in terms of a organizing principle of US-China rivalry or what is going to happen on the line of actual control with India in a predictable way. So I would say if that is taken as a given, it's useful that we go back to first principles. And certainly, to my mind, the first principle always is that you focus very sharply on your own neighborhood.
Yeah.
As you said, with elections in Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and India, 2024 is a year of opportunity, but could also be a testing time for us. And it's good to focus much more sharply on our neighborhood, because it's easy sometimes to think that we have graduated beyond our neighborhood, when in fact we have not. And
That's a
our
very good
neighborhood
point.
and our neighborhood is really where the key challenges will be in the coming future.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much. I like that bit about thinking we graduated beyond our neighborhood. Professor Matu, would you like to comment on this, weigh in on on these issues?
I think
Have
Ambassador,
have we graduated beyond our neighborhood, or are we limited to our neighborhood,
I
or
think
should we stay limited to our neighborhood?
I think Ambassador Raghavan, as usual, with his wise and sagely view of the world, has given us really a reality check. You cannot, even if you wanted to, graduate beyond your neighborhood, and yet you obviously have to look beyond the neighborhood. Atal Bihari Vajpayee famously said, and it's become a cliche, that you can never change your neighbors. You can change your friends, but you can't change your neighbors. Your neighbors are here to stay. And as Ambassador Raghavan pointed out, I think the neighbors present both a challenge, as they have always done, and an opportunity. And particularly in 2024. Let's begin with what is seen as our strongest ally, Bangladesh, and the elections, which seem to be, if I can use a word which does not in some ways undermine the legitimacy, but at least predetermined in favor of Sheikh Hasina. The BNP, our main rival, has boycotted the elections. Khalida Zia is in house arrest. And the paradox that Sheikh Hasina represents is a paradox in many ways that many countries in the world represent. A country which is becoming, in human development terms, much more capable, much more, much higher, ranks much higher. Its economy is doing much better. On all the social indices, it seems to be even overtaking India, and yet it is becoming increasingly authoritarian. It's becoming increasingly intolerant of dissent and opposition within. So India
Yeah,
has wisely, I think, said
if
that
she
it will not
wins
interfere.
her fourth term, if she wins her
Yeah,
third or fourth term, I forget which,
yeah,
then she'll be in complete control, and the army
yeah.
now supports her as well.
Yeah. As a good journalist, you're saying if, I'd say it is almost certain that she will win I'll be a little more, less risk averse than the ambassador would have been in his previous avatar, or you can be in your new avatar. I think it's almost certain that she will win. The question is, will Bangladesh move into greater authoritarianism, or will there be a certain moderation or induced in Sheikh Hasina's new government, even while it gallops forward, as I said, in terms of development indicators.
I
Pakistan,
think
of
the
course, is
other
the
issue
biggest
with
challenge.
Hasina, the other issue with Sheikh Hasina, as it is with President Ranil Wickremesinghe and the Bhutanese king and all of them, is that whether they will stay within India's ambit. I mean,
Yeah.
within
I mean, yeah,
the area, can we still influence
yeah.
or not influence, but can we still be the friendly neighbor that we should be?
Nina, this is what I was going to come to, that Pakistan represents the biggest challenge but yet the return of Nawaz Sharif, and given the fact that Nawaz Sharif is seen as a deal maker, as a businessman, and it was during his earlier tenures that we had signs of a real breakthrough in India-Pakistan relations. Will that climate be revived? We know there was a back channel which existed between the National Security Advisor and the Army Chief and the ISI Chief, and that back channel was able to at least ensure a modicum of stability on the line of control. But that back channel has either been subverted or is no longer active. Pakistan represents Bangladesh. And look, India, for better or worse, since Indira Gandhi's time, has wanted a sort of a Monroe doctrine in South Asia, which means keep external forces out and try and actually have maximum influence on the destiny of South Asia. Now, that requires, as Ambassador Raghavan said, a fair degree of attention to South Asia, much greater than what we saw in 2023 in many ways. And in some ways, the fact that we did not manage the neighborhood as well as we could have was perhaps expressed more sharply by the smallest island neighbor, Maldives, asking us to withdraw our forces represents a, not a critical challenge to Indian supremacy in some ways, but it represents the forces that could be activated in 2024 much more than have been present in the last year. Overall, however, India's attempts at controlling the region, making most of the opportunities, will be in some ways, and that's where I disagree with Ambassador Raghav. Not disagree, but really, in some ways, moderate or modulate his argument further, is that the unipolar moment seems to be over. Whether there is a trend towards isolationism or greater activism or a continuation of the kind of Biden policies for next 4 years remains to be seen. If Trump returns to power in November, then all bets are off about what
Yeah,
Trump might do for American foreign policy in terms of perhaps a retreat and a degree of adventurism both. So within an international system where the unipolar moment may be over, but America retains the supremacy in terms of just material power, if you have
mm,
an America withdrawing, what does that do to India? And you, in your preamble statement, made the point about how the relationship between the US and India, despite setbacks, particularly over Khalistani extremism, and has sustained itself. That relationship it has the bandwidth today to be resilient and perhaps not be a one issue relationship. But what happens if there is a change? And American presidents can often change the direction of American foreign policy much more
yeah,
than any one leader can be.
as
You
they did
have
in
crisis and
Afghanistan.
opportunity in South Asia. You have at the international level, there is this larger game being played within which India now needs to be perhaps much more vigilant. Some people say that at the end of 2024, you'll have a new international order, so to speak.
That's right.
2025, you have a new international order in the making. This will require the flexibility, imagination, vision that in episodically, I think the foreign minister.
I was just looking at the other strategic shift that India's got to. India's got one foot in Russia, which is an old and trusted ally, and Foreign Minister Jaishankar was in Moscow recently, and Russian President Vladimir Putin lavish praise on India and Modi when he made the surprise visit to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, both countries which are seen as close to the United States, and in the case of Doha, very close to Iran as well. So where do India-Russia ties really stand? If both of you could comment on that, I would find that I'm sure it must be very difficult for Delhi to to manage the conflicting demands that are made of it by the US when it knows that India needs Russia for its oil and for its defense needs. I mean, the US is trying to step in. We can see that on co-producing jet engines and Predator drones and patrolling the Indian Pacific. So, despite Ukraine, despite Hamas, where do you see the India-Russia relations, Ambassador Raghavan?
Well, I mean, to put it very bluntly, I think India-Russia relations represent the past, and India-US relations are the future. Now, if we put it like that, it appears that something cataclysmic has changed, but in fact, it has not, because the past has a huge overhang in the present and also into the future. So, to my mind, there is certainly an energy and a depth in the Indo-US relationship today, which is unfortunately absent in the India-Russia relationship, despite the efforts of the governments of both countries. Many things which should have happened in India-Russia relations have not taken place.
For example,
well, I think one very evident example is the North-South corridor.
yes.
Which had a certain potential and it has a certain compelling logic even now, but it requires a wider architectural change in terms of what happens in Iran and what happens between India and Iran and what happens with the impact of US sanctions. So all those pieces were not in place, because of which, and there are other examples also. But I would say that despite the great depth and the new energy in India-US relations, the India-Russia relationship will have a relevance and a certain substantive presence, no matter what happens in India-US relations. I think
does it mean that it will displace or Russia? The US will displace Russia in the years to come, or do you think that India will continue to keep that relationship alive?
No, if one sees India-Russia relations as a fraction of, or as a fraction of the total composite of all relations we have, that fraction will keep reducing. Whether you look at trade, whether you look at arms transfers, whether you look at science and technology cooperation or any other indices. But that is not to say that the absolute value of that fraction is going to reduce in importance. So India-US relations will have a certain immovable presence in our overall, external profile. But if I may just, respond to something which Professor Mattu was saying, and while I agree, I think what is going to happen in the US is of great importance, and certainly, but I think one should be on our guard against, the overwhelming force of the US narrative, which tries to see the United States as a principal organizing factor in the world. In fact, things have changed. I mean, the two major crises which we have faced, foreign policy crisis, which we have faced in the last 2 years, the war in Ukraine and what has happened in Israel with Hamas in Gaza, had in fact very little to do with US calculations, but rather calculations with other powers and other forces reached quite independently of what they thought the US would do or not.
They were caught napping, actually.
Yeah, so I think we should be on our guard against seeing everything in terms of the US-China prism or just the US prism or indeed even the India-US prism. There's much more happening in the world which we are going to be impacted by than just that.
So are we also, again with Israel, we've reached out to the Israeli Prime Minister multiple times, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority, a few times. But the perception in the world is that we've abandoned the Palestinian cause. Do you think I agree, you can do nothing but sympathize with what happened on October 7th. I mean, that was beyond any, it was horrific to even imagine something like that happening. But should we not also call for a ceasefire? I mean, we haven't really stepped up, have we? Is there a need for a course correction there as well, Ambassador Raghavan?
You see, these are largely optical perceptions because, quite frankly, what Hamas will do and what the Israelis will do, they are in a mindset right now which is not of listening to anyone. And there is this debate in virtually every country in the world today that are you doing enough to play a more positive role in terms of what is happening in Gaza. So while one can say at certain times there was need for India to have taken a more balanced position, I think our initial reactions tilted too much towards the Israeli position. But on the other hand, these are very, very fine judgment calls.
That's true.
What happened was a major act of terrorism.
Yeah.
And since we ourselves have been victims of terrorism, it's impossible to overlook that factor and concentrate on the historical and structural causes which led to that major act of terrorism. So while the context is important, the contingent development is even more important. So I don't think we can disregard the fact that a major act of terrorism is what was the event which changed everything. But at the same time, we all know there is a context, and we all know that there is a structural fault line in Israel and how it has dealt with the Palestinian issue, and it was something which was waiting to happen. Because if you think you can disregard a fault line, you're only fooling yourself.
That's very true. That's very true. If I can come back to you, Professor Matu, one of the most intriguing developments, I believe, of this Hamas-Israel conflict is also the rise of all these, other powers like Iran, which the Biden administration actually set up a relationship with, on releasing frozen funds. And now Qatar has begun to play a huge role as a mediator, tiny Qatar. And there is the rise of Saudi Arabia, which is pulling at any restrictions that the Saudis that the US is putting on them. We in the Gulf have enormous goodwill. We have a huge Indian diaspora. But in terms of our standing as a South Asian power, as a military power, as a trading partner, how do we stand in the Gulf countries, you think? And particularly that with this, the Qataris charging that those former retired naval officers with spying, that has also thrown a little bit of a spin. Professor Matu?
I think what is clear is that the world is much more complex, especially after these two conflicts. And I agree with Ambassador Raghavan that we shouldn't buy into the American narrative that they alone determine in some ways the future of the international system. In fact, the 2023 has been a reality check for precisely those people who thought that hanging on to the coat strings of America was going to resolve many of the problems that they faced in the international system within New Delhi. But this has been a reality check, and in some ways, Indian foreign policy has become much more nuanced, even though the knee-jerk reaction is still to perhaps respond the manner in which they anticipate the Americans or Washington will be kept in good humor. I think you pointed out, and Ambassador Raghavan pointed out, that Russia represents the past and America represents the future. But the fact that Russia represents a past which is still active today, it's not just part of our imagination or our dreams or our nightmares. It's an it's a way of demonstrating your own agency and your own autonomy that Russia becomes more important than the kind of bilateral transactions or the cheaper oil that we are getting. And that's why
Mm.
the greatest way in which we can demonstrate in 2024 again is the recognition of this complex world is by exercising our agency, exercising our autonomy, and demonstrating to the world that we are not just going to be a junior partner to any American-led alliance in Asia. The Russians often tell you, "Are you going to be a Germany?" And
Mm.
bilaterally, they tell you, "Are you going to be a Ukraine?" So, I mean, the more offensive people suggest that you could be a Ukraine, while the more slightly broad-minded people say that you're going to be a Germany. The fact is that India, and that's where what distinguish most rising powers from India is that for India, frankly, permanent interests are important, national interests are important, but principles have always been important. In fact, some of the schizophrenic responses to the Palestinian crisis, to begin with, not abstaining from the resolution which called for a ceasefire and called for humanitarian assistance, was shocking. And yet there has been a
Sure.
connection through that few weeks from the initial, as Ambassador Raghavan pointed out, the perhaps also the shock of the Hamas attack and the terrible attack that Hamas conducted, to recognizing, as even the Americans point out, that you need a two-state solution in the Middle East.
They do.
Similarly, within the Gulf, I think India has made great inroads, and including and some of these inroads have been made through the exchange between the national security establishments. In fact, with whether it was with the Saudis or other Gulf countries, I think whether it's the Foreign Office, but also the National Security Advisor's Office, which has played a role. Incidents like the naval seamen being tried and uh, imprisoned and sentenced are incidents which are going to happen all the time. You do not, the fact that your relationships are resilient enough, broad-based enough for them not to jeopardize relations is what is more important. Just as a peg, I thought I'll tell you that we've just written a book on getting lessons from the Mahabharata. And one of
Mhm.
the lessons is of the unequal, in some ways, quirky friendship between Duryodhan and Karn. And Karn
Mhm.
rejects the kingdom, the empire which Krishna offers him, and Kunti, his own mother, offers him that you are my eldest son, you can inherit this empire. You take over, just cross over to the side of the Pandavas. And Karan says, as India would say, that how will history judge me? Uh, History will judge me as someone who betrayed his long-standing friend, someone who had stood by him when there was no one to speak for him, just because of uh, material advantage. We all forget that even today, Russia is the only country of the P5 which recognizes Jammu and Kashmir as an integral part of India. An issue which is
Oh,
close to you and close to me as well, that no other P4 or P5 country, neither France, nor the United States, nor the United Kingdom, recognize, or China certainly not, but recognize J&K. And given the how J&K matters to us in terms of both our foreign policy and domestic policy, shouldn't that be some ways a test of our friendship? Don't let it be a test of our friendship, but also recognize that you shouldn't abandon Russia or you shouldn't abandon other allies, and you have to play a much more nuanced game in the Middle East, not seen as just becoming a junior partner of Americans or abandoning our relationship with the Palestinians or the Gulf countries, even as we have stronger relations with Israel. Israel offers us defense equipment. Israel has
the
invested in
drones.
agriculture technology as well. You go from here to Jaipur, you'll see uh, grapevine farms, all because of Israeli desert agriculture practices being imported into India. So there is a great deal that we do with Israel, but this is not a zero-sum game. No one expects you to have a zero-sum relationship. It's past that age. I mean, India didn't have a zero-sum relationship even when we were poorer, weaker. and had less of a standing in the world. Why should we now decide that we should just follow knee-jerk
That's a
response?
very good question. That's a very good point.
When we
An
could
extremely good
pursue
question.
the idea of non-alignment when we had no strengths. Today, surely, just because China has risen and threatens us, we
Yes,
should.
China is something that you guys need to talk a little bit more about.
I'll let
I mean, it
Ambassador
is the
Raghavan
elephant. It's the
do the
elephant
first
in the
bit.
room, or
Yeah.
shall I say, the dragon in the room.
I mean, the other elections that you've forgotten about are the elections in Taiwan. And if the KMT were to
Oh
win,
yes, no, yes, of course.
and if the Kuomintang would to win, then you could probably see a moderation of tensions. But at what cost, one doesn't know. What are the compromises that Taiwan will offer China? But otherwise, the Taiwan Straits could flare up in the next few months again.
Yeah. So, Ambassador Raghavan, if we can just talk about China, but Professor Mattu, I do want to talk about the abandonment of Afghanistan and where we're going with Pakistan. Both of you are Pakistan, Afghanistan experts. But if we can just get the China story in, where is it that we are handling of China? Is it the right way forward? I mean, to be part of so many sort of alliances that are geared to block China.
Well, you see, the Chinese assertion is a global phenomenon, and it has led to global reactions. And certainly, you have to be on the right side of those global reactions. So it is not as if you are facing a situation which is somewhat unique where China is concerned. Many other countries are facing the same impact as we are because of China's astonishing military and economic ascent. But having said that, it is also a fact that you are a close neighbor of China.
That's right.
You're not just dealing with China as an abstract issue 2 continents away with the ocean in between, but you are a continental neighbor. You have a land border which is not settled. You have a history of an adversarial relationship, but you also have a history of a positive, forward-looking relationship for a very long period of time. So it's not uniformly a bad picture. So I think the fact that we have to manage China, taking into account this global assertion, but at the same time, taking into account our own unique relationship, which is that it is an immediate neighbor with which you have a history both of very intense conflict, but also a very positive cooperation. So our relationship has to be based on all these elements and cannot be dictated by one single principle, which is of containing China. So
but what about, do you believe that there should be some kind of back channel maneuver or outreach to them?
I think we should try whatever we can do to stabilize the relationship with China. And I'm pretty sure the government is doing so. And any government in its position would have done so. And previous governments have also done so. You have to deal with such an important neighbor to make sure that your relationship has some elements of stabilization in it. I don't think we can go down the route of self-fulfilling prophecy that conflict with China is inevitable, so we should embrace it. I think that would be an intrinsically foolish approach. Secondly, I think we have to avoid, a tactical or a heavily securitized approach to China, because that again would be foolish. The fact is, as Dr. Mattu said at the beginning, there are neighbors who are going to be your neighbors for all times to come. The onus is on you on how you manage that relationship. It's never going to be easy. When you have a neighbor like China, or you have a neighbor like Pakistan, or you have a neighbor like Nepal for that matter, you will never have a simple, stable, trouble-free, friction-free relationship. There will always be ups and downs. But the onus is on you to manage those ups and downs. Because in the end, if there is one lesson for us from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, it is that this is how neighbors can manage their relationships badly.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, we don't know who is the winner in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but the two big losers are Ukraine and Russia. itself.
That's true.
On that, there is perfect unanimity. So one direction where you certainly don't want to go down is this heavily securitized framework, which leads to the Russia-Ukraine type of situation.
So if I can just get to Afghanistan, which you rightly said was, was America exiting in a great big hurry. Have we in India sort of abandoned Afghanistan as well? I mean, we reached out to the Taliban. There were secret meetings in Doha, and we've maintained, the ambassador, the Afghan ambassador, is no longer there in Delhi. It's being run by, by his the consuls in Bombay. So, sorry, Mumbai. So, what exactly? Where do we stand vis-a-vis Afghanistan and the Taliban, which is flexing its muscles where Pakistan's concerned? It's basically encroaching. There's a tussle over the return of refugees. It isn't a very pleasant relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and we still haven't been able to. We haven't been able to make political capital out of it.
Well, to my mind, I think what we need to do more than anything else is introspect about how we view Afghanistan. Because what has happened in the last 2 years, really, it's worth going back to our pre-2021 analysis of what will happen when the Taliban takes over and what a major strategic destabilizing factor that would be and how Pakistan will increase its strategic depth. None of that has happened. I do think we need to look at Afghanistan with slightly different, maybe a fresh approach, that there is an internal dynamic and a sub-regional dynamic in Afghanistan, which is relatively insulated from what India thinks or what US thinks. So, it has its own logic. And perhaps the Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship reflects that internal logic. So, and as I said, all of us, me included, if I read what I was writing in 2019, 2020, 2021, it's clearly we were missing something, because the way developments have taken place in Afghanistan proves that all this notion about this preordained course we were seeing in Afghanistan when the Americans withdrew turned out to be wrong. So I would say that for us in Afghanistan, we should approach it with more humility. I think there are very serious issues internal to Afghanistan. I mean, how do we take a stand on what the Taliban means and what it stands for without disregarding deeply cherished principles of our own, of what should be the role of women in society, what should be the role of education in society. So I think Afghanistan really raises those questions, but at the same time, evidently the Taliban has done some things right. You have a lesser extent of conflict in Afghanistan today than you've had for 25 years. They have managed the economy much better than anyone expected. So I think for us, we have to introspect and perhaps tread much more carefully than we did in the past. Because, as I said, the domestic internal logic in Afghanistan ultimately is going to prevail over externally imposed patterns.
Professor Mattu, if I can come to you.
I just thought I'll add, I completely agree that we do need to be more humble about our own predictions, and India needs to be much more humble about the role it can play in Afghanistan and not see it within the zero-sum prism of its relations with Pakistan. But what saddens me as someone who has always believed in the future of people-to-people relationship with the people of Afghanistan is that somehow, either deliberately or willy-nilly, because of the circumstances that obtain in Afghanistan, we seem to be doing less and less with the Afghan people. All our investments, you remember, and Ambassador Raghavan was someone who oversaw these arrangements, first as heading the Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan desk here, and then as ambassador in Afghanistan. the fact that you don't have Afghans getting visas for medical treatment, for education in
That's
India,
tragic.
it's a tragedy. If we are going to seal our borders, or if there's going to be this kind of a U-turn where on the one hand, we make an argument our real investment is not in the Tajiks or the Northern Alliance, and we are not against the Pashtuns, but we are really reaching out to the people of Afghanistan. Bage, I mean, you've made hospitals, you made the parliament, you created
That's
gardens,
true.
etc. And you invested in scholarships. There was an India-Afghanistan Foundation, which Ambassador Raghavan was leading, and I was a member of that foundation. We were giving projects for museums in Afghanistan and so
Yeah.
on. All that has come to a naught, at least.
And there are hundreds and thousands of
Itinerary.
students who are still living in India.
I mean,
for whom these are the government
at one
protests.
stage, from one stage where if you went to a hospital, private hospital in South Delhi or in the NCR, you wouldn't find you wouldn't find a bed because most beds were taken by Afghans, to a point where
Yeah.
this completely choked off.
Yeah.
I
I
really
agree.
can't make sense of this policy of depriving the people of Afghanistan um, in that sense of what was India's greatest asset, its soft power. Unless you go back
It
to the
is.
colonial policy that you can never win a Afghan's heart, you can only rent an Afghan. I find that cynical.
No.
I find that mindset colonial, and I genuinely believe that all the goodwill that we had invested in is going to vaporize if we continue with that policy. But I would really want Ambassador Raghavan to comment on whether that he agrees with this no visa policy, zero visa policy, or maybe I'm reading too much on it. There is no policy, it's just bureaucratic inertia. There isn't a facility through which you can apply for a visa. But in
No,
any
no,
case,
you're absolutely right, Professor Mattu. Nobody, the Afghans that I speak to are distraught. They're absolutely destroyed because
and
they can't go, they're stuck in India
I mean,
or they can't leave.
I was one of those who opposes the Taliban and continue to do that. And I do not
So,
agree with Ambassador Raghavan that they have changed their stripes. I think they're basically zealots, and I don't like zealots. And I think they're anti-women, and they are not in any way progressive. I mean, if you need a progressive authoritarian, then you go to you do business with people like MBS, who has opened up Saudi Arabia in a manner that you can go in and find a sea change. The Taliban are not that. They're
no,
not
they're
even
not.
related to Pakhtunwali. What I say is that the argument then made was that we are um, reaching out to the Taliban. Where has that reach out got to? I mean, are we dealing with some kind of an imaginary Quetta Shura, or who else are we sent emissaries
The
to?
Doha Shura
I
is
don't know. I
basically
mean,
a,
either it's so hush hush that no one knows, or nothing is happening. Uh, and with the
no,
now
what
the
I
Iran
meant by
refugees,
making political capital actually was that, there is a division between the Quetta Shura and the Doha Shura. I don't know whether we've been able to, sort of make
yeah,
a
but
bridge
even with
and
the
reach
Northern
out to
Alliance,
him.
even with the so-called Northern Alliance,
Which is
Abdullah
Ahmad
used to have
Masood.
his house in or his family live in east of Kailash. So he
That's
had
true.
family and blood ties to India in a
To
manner.
Delhi.
I guess he still has that family. But
He
where is
does.
the Karzai had a kind of he would swear by India. Each time you went and met him, he would swear. Where are these leaders vanished? I mean, why aren't they speaking up, or why aren't we engaging them, or is this so quiet? And the last ambassador, I don't even know where he's posted now, Mr. Rudrendra Tandon. I think Ambassador Raghavan may know, but I really don't know where he's this, because he was a genuine expert on South Asia.
He was. He was. Yeah, I know. I think that's why I'm saying Afghanistan is something that we should, that as a country we should apply our minds to. And I mean, I'm not saying create dissension within the ranks, but we lose nothing by giving humanitarian relief and supporting, the ordinary Afghans. I mean, the rich Afghans have all fled, but the ordinary man in the street who needs the help is not getting the help that he should. You know, if I can
I
just go.
agree. I agree with Dr. Battu entirely about visas. I think more than the visas. I think it has sent a totally wrong narrative message. And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I think we will pay the cost for that for a long time. Because, to have the tag of someone who has abandoned old friends is not a very good tag.
Exactly.
No, we have abandoned the Afghan people. I mean, at once upon a time, we were the chief, the supporters of Ahmad Shah Massoud, and today, Ahmad Massoud and has not even been given a chance to visit Delhi. So there is a major problem there. But the impact on Pakistan. But since both of you are the ones I read when I want to learn about Pakistan and Kashmir. Now India's abrogation of 370 is no longer it's not even a subject of discussion anymore. It's just sort of ensured that Pakistan cannot bring it up in the future. But Pakistan itself is going to face an election, and the military is, as I said, playing musical chairs with the politicians. We probably see the return of Nawaz Sharif. Will we also see the return of some kind of détente then between India and Pakistan, some kind of rapprochement, which Imran Khan destroyed with great elan when he said that he wouldn't even talk about it. I mean, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari too has brought up Kashmir many times, especially when he was in Goa. So where do you see it panning out?
If I can step in, because I would like to then benefit from the words of Ambassador Raghavan. Now, contrary to what you say, my understanding is that no matter what Imran Khan said in public, he activated this back channel.
It wasn't. It wasn't the general.
The general did, but
Bajwa?
with at least the reports that we have from some of the journalists who were briefed, or some of the people who were briefed, suggests that Imran, it had the acquiescence of Imran Khan, that General Bajwa was and the ISI chief, Fahim Hamid, were speaking. Yeah, Faiz Hamid was speaking to the NSA, Mr. Doval, or his deputies, and that one of the things discussed during that was how to stabilize the LLC line of control, but also that perhaps as a face saver for Pakistan, an announcement of a return of statehood would be a way in which you could probably open relations. And then there was a talk of the possibility. Again, these are all Pakistani reportage. This is not sourced to anyone in India that I know or who has spoken in that matter, but that there could have been the possibility of Prime Minister Modi visiting Pakistan and really making the opening that he wanted to make when he visited Nawaz Sharif on his birthday and his granddaughter's marriage on Christmas of 2019, or I think
2018.
15.
2015.
Oh, 2015, yes.
Yeah. 2015, on his way back from Kabul. But this is I mean, so what people say in public and what Indian and South Asian politicians say in public, I take with a bag full of Himalayan rock salt, which is a healthy option to take as well. But so please don't read too much. But certainly, Nawaz Sharif's track record suggests that he is someone who's always been open to normalization, and he's a businessman. He grew up as a business, it's part of his DNA.
That's true.
And he
That's true.
until Musharraf sabotaged his peace process, the Lahore peace process, because of at Kargil, he was someone who wanted to do business with India. And apparently, even while in exile in outside Pakistan, he has indicated that there is no option but to.
But he's also said, Professor Mattu, he's also said that this 4-point formula, which Musharraf offered Manmohan Singh, was also a sabotage. He doesn't approve of that 4-point formula at all. No. I mean, this is something he has said to me.
Yeah, the 4-point formula in any case is history. I don't think there'll be any takers in India now for the 4-point formula, except perhaps in certain newspapers. But no, I mean, I think we have to rework. What we have to rework is how do you normalize relations, and do we normalize relations by at least adding a civility? Let the high commissioners be appointed, or
That's right.
and let us get back to doing some form of business again. I mean, that in fact brings you to the metaphor, the example of China. China is the source, even today, despite the economic wars inside, of the prosperity of much of the world. India's imports from China have increased since Galwan, since the COVID pandemic. All talk about supply chain diversification has not actually translated into any kind of less dependence on China, but it's also a source of
That's
great
true.
anxiety. And that's for most of the world. It is anxiety matched with prosperity. So you have to balance out. So that if you can ensure at least the prosperity of Pakistan through India, then perhaps you can quieten for some time and the anxiety in bilateral relations, unless there's a major crisis.
So why is it that our leaders keep on bringing up Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and Bilawal Bhutto Zardari brings up Kashmir itself? I mean, that is a little bit of a, muddying the waters a bit, isn't it?
In our case, it's a parliamentary resolution, so we cannot afford to disregard. We are a parliamentary democracy. But beyond that, of course, I think the realities on the ground may
So
determine.
we've closed the door on any negotiation on the status of Jammu and Kashmir.
That, I think, is a question which is best answered by Ambassador Raghavan, who has dealt with this issue bilaterally for more years than I can know anyone else.
Ambassador Raghavan, would you like to come in and tell us what you think?
Well, first point is when we're asking about Imran Khan versus Nawaz Sharif, I think in
Yes.
India, because we tend to conduct foreign policy on the basis of how to demonize the other,
Yes.
the fact is that everyone in Pakistan, everyone without exception, wants to deal with India and wants to do a deal with
Very
India.
interesting.
So when we demonize one and extol the other, we overlook this fact. All political figures in Pakistan want to have an agreement with India. Some are more realistic, and what you can do with them is more in the realms of possibility. Others are less realistic.
So can we rightly conclude that Imran Khan was the man who drove the opening
Imran
of the
Khan,
Qatar?
when he became Prime Minister, used to describe himself as the pro-Indian party in Pakistan. He said, I know India more than anyone else in Pakistan does. I have spent more time in India. I have traveled more in India. I have more friends in India. I'm surrounded. His cabinet was made up of friends who were all pro-India people. There's no doubt about that. But there is a contingent element in India-Pakistan relations, and which nobody can control. Just like Prime Minister Modi was not able to control that contingent element in India-Pakistan relations, it's unrealistic to expect Imran Khan to control it. Prime Minister Modi tried. He tried harder than most other people have, which is what led to that famous visit in 2015. But neighborhood situations have their own logic. You cannot control it. You cannot control it. You cannot calibrate it. You cannot fine-tune it. You have to manage it best as you can. I think looking ahead 2024 onwards, I think we are in a bad situation with Pakistan for reasons which are well known. But I think there are some positives. We are going to have 2 legacy prime ministers next year onwards, most probably. If Prime Minister Imran Khan wins and if the BJP returns to power, certainly you will have 2 people as prime minister who have in the past, demonstrated a certain personal commitment to the relationship. So that is a positive factor. Whether that in itself is enough to untie the knot, one doesn't know. Because the knot has to be untied, and all knots require 2 hands to untie. One party can't do it by itself. But I think we tend to overlook that India has to play a major role, or the bigger role, in untying the knot. It's too much to expect Pakistan to do it on its own. We are the larger country. We are the most stable country. We have more options to play with. So in the end, it's a question of what we decide to do. How are we going to look ahead? Now, no one is going to, Nobody can say that you can, even if you have the best policy in the world, it's not as if things will go your way. Things may still go wrong. So that is one risk. The second risk is to convince people in India, because in India there's often this question that why do you want to improve relations with Pakistan?
And
it's a good
also
question.
Pakistan is used as a bogey for most elections.
No, but apart from the bogey, what are we going to get out of Pakistan? We're not going to get anything out of Pakistan. Our economy no longer is at a stage where it can benefit in any very substantial way from an interface with Pakistan. So the only thing you get out of a relationship with Pakistan is you stabilize your neighborhood.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, if you think that is good enough, then it's worth investing in the relationship. Otherwise, you're taking a grave risk by moving ahead with leaving a neighborhood which is unstable, which can go off at any tangent, at any point of time. And then you have examples of what is happening in Gaza, what is happening in Ukraine, before you to. So I would see it in those terms.
And if anyone can do it, it's Prime Minister Modi, as leaving behind this another great legacy. He's ticked off almost every box in his manifesto. This uniform civil code will probably become a reality in the next term, but after that, this is one irritant for 75 years, which has been with us. So if you really want to enter into an Amrit Kal and be a developed country by 2047, no better message than resolving this problem. This would be a pinnacle of achievements for the Amrit Kal, which has been anticipated and announced.
That's fantastic. Beautifully conclusion to make as we approach 2024. I hope that what you say comes true, Professor Mattu, that we do have, some kind of vision and Modi powering it into the future. And thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Raghavan. Do you have anything else which you'd like to add?
No, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting.
Yeah. It was really a very, very fruitful discussion. Thank you, Ambassador Raghavan. Thank you very much, Professor Mattu, for all your insightful comments. Please click on the New Indian Express web edition and the Global Express icon to watch the show. Do retweet and share on social media.